Good evening, dear students. The very big problem one surgeon will be facing occasionally in lifetime, the short bowel syndrome. The short bowel can be due to the functional aspect of it, or it could be due to the surgical resection of a long segment of bowel, due to a vascular geopardy and so on. So we will go in detail about this short bowel syndrome. Majority of the cases are being treated conservatively with the medical line of management, nutrition support and so on. If it is compelling, there are about half a dozen surgical procedures that can be done, which will lengthen the bowel, increases the mucosal absorptive area. It can slow down the transit so that more food can stay there and go ahead. Like that, and it has come to the level of the transplant of the small bowel. We'll see everything in detail. This is a very important topic, very rarely spoken, but every surgeon should know about short bowel syndrome. We'll go with that. Normal length of the intestine is anywhere between 600 to 670 centimeters. The short bowel syndrome occurs when the length is less than 200 centimeters. The minimal length of the small intestine required to prevent dependence on total parenteral nutrition is if the colon is absent, it requires a minimum of 100 centimeters of the small bowel. If there is a completely functioning colon available, it's about 60 centimeters can be made or put into use in such a way that the patient can slowly be weaned off from parenteral nutrition. Etiology, it can be congenital. The congenital are the intestinal atresia, gastroschisis, extensive aganglionosis, which produce a pseudo-obstruction. The acquired causes can be surgical resection of the bowel, due to mesenteric ischemia, Crohn's disease, necrotizing enterocolitis, or trauma involving a major portion of the bowel. The functional small bowel syndromes are without the intestinal resection, physiological loss of function, or persistent malabsorption syndromes are due to a very bad radiation enteritis, low-grade indolent malignancies like pseudomyxoma peritonei, and also malignancy occurring in the peritoneum itself, refractory sprue, congenital villus atrophy, chronic intestinal pseudo-obstruction syndrome that's called Wilkie's disease. Wilkie is an obstruction due to a pseudo-obstruction. Hallmarks of small bowel syndrome are severe nutrient and fluid malabsorption, chronic imbalances of, I'm going to go slow today because it's a difficult topic, imbalance of micronutrient, fluid, protein, electrolytes, and carbohydrates. Prognostications depends on the remaining length of the functional intestine, active presence of underlying etiological disease like Crohn's and radiation enteritis, presence or functionally continuity with the colon with the ileocecal valve, very good scenario, age at what it presents. Normal intestinal physiology, a brief outline. Stomach, there is no absorption. The secretion is as gastrin. Duodenum, the things absorbed are fat, sugars, protein, calcium, water soluble vitamins, iron and folate. The enzymes that are secreted are the cholecystokinin, secretin and VIP. In jejunum, Fat, sugar, proteins, calcium, and water-soluble vitamins. Along with that, lactose also gets absorbed. That is why lactose intolerance is seen in some of the children due to the problem in the small intestine. The things secreted is neurotensin, distal ileum, bile salts and vitamin B12 are there. They mingle and get absorbed. They are there. And the thing that are produced are polypeptide, GLP and GLP2, that is glucagon-like polypeptide, colon, amino acids and carbohydrates via short-chain fatty acids. These are the things gets absorbed. These are the secretions at various levels. And one more thing in colon, you'd have to say, on the right side, complete water is absorbed. Maximum amount of water gets absorbed because the liquid motion comes here, gets absorbed. On the left side, it becomes a solid motion. Pathophysiology, loss of intestinal absorption surface due to the short length or the available absorptive area due to a medical disease, loss of ileocecal valve, decrease in intestinal hormone production. All these combine to give short bowel syndrome. Pathophysiology, large volumes of undigested nutrients entering the GI tract. They are hyperosmotic in the distal GI, receives blood from the circulating system that increases the luminal water. They're going for an intense diarrhea. So, in a nutshell, it has got an intestinal hurry, everything is thrown out, there is no time for the absorption to take place. This is what the pathophysiology is. Different types of small bowel syndrome, depending on the resected intestine, you'll see. Majority here, in this case, you can see, majority of the jejunum is resected, only this much is available. But here, the good thing is the ileocecal valve is there, the colon, full colon is there. This is a good scenario, and the ileojejunal anastomosis has been done. More than 10 centimeters, the terminal ileum is there, ileocecal valve is there, colon remains. There is an impaired digestion and increased gastric acid secretion, manifests as a diarrhea. After some time, the intestinal adaptation occurs, and this can help us to wean him off from the parenteral nutrition if at all we have put it. This is a better scenario. Type 1 is a better scenario. Greatest chance of nutritional recovery, I told you. Type 1. Again, you see what is type 1? Don't forget, more of jejunum, presence of ileocecal valve, complete functioning colon, and ileum is more than 10 centimeters distally. So this is, in a short bowel syndrome, in a nutshell, is a good scenario for you to treat a patient is likely to improve over a period of time. He can be weaned off from the total parenteral nutrition. So, great chance of nutritional recovery, greater potential of functional adaptation by the ileum. There is a function, the moment you resect, the adaptation of the small bowel, residual small bowel starts. I'll tell you immediately. Within 24 hours it starts. Permanent need for a parenteral nutrition low. Minimum jejunal length required 40 centimeter. If you have got luckily more than 60 centimeter, with the given scenario above, the patient will recover. Dehydration issues are less. So type 1 we have talked. This is type 2. This is a little, not a very good thing, but still the jejunum is very, very less. This is the third part of the jejunum, the fourth part of the duodenum, duodenum junction. There's hardly anything. But one plus point is there is ileocecal valve is present, terminal ileum is present. That is the plus point. But this is a little difficult scenario. Most of the ileum and part of the jejunum or colon is resected. Or here the colon resection has not been shown. Probably is trying to show up to this. The colon is resected. Loss of the adaptive capacity of the ileum and colon. When you remove from here the whole thing, then it will become loss of the adaptive capacity. But if this alone is there with this scenario, again this is a good scenario, but the picture is slightly wrong here. There's only jejunum is there. This is gone, most of the colon is gone. then you are going to anastomose this to here. That is very, very difficult and less of the adaptivity of the adaptive capacity of the ileum and colon. Parenteral nutrition should be given lifelong. So what happens? Disruption of the vitamin B12 and intrahepatic bile circulation is lost in type 2, unabsorbed bile salts in the colon, fat malabsorption, and also the fat soluble vitamins, diarrhea and steatorrhea. So all these things in type 2 leads to fat malabsorption, diarrhea, unabsorbed bile salts in the colon, choleritic diarrhea. Bile salts enter the colon, choleritic diarrhea. Because there is fat malabsorption, the fat soluble vitamins are not absorbed, and that leads to, because of the bile salts are entering, it goes in for diarrhea. Because there is no pancreatic enzyme going down, the fat is malabsorbed, because of that is steatorrhea. This is type 2. Type 2 angiostomy, very much incompatible with life. It's a high output fistula. Everything is removed. Greatest malabsorption issues. High output, as I told you. If the angiostomy is less than 100 centimeter, there is loss of gastric and intestinal secretions, needs permanent total parenteral nutrition. But this is the ideal case for a transplant. If the patient is sufficiently young, he has got a long way to go in his life. If the patient is acceptable, if the facilities are available, transplant is the answer, even for type 2 and type 3. Manifestations of type 2 and type 3 is significant water and sodium loss, acute hypotension because of the watery diarrhea, hyperosmolar, food going, fluid is sucked out of the vascular system, hypovolemia, that will go into acute hypotension. Because of that, the perfusion of the kidney goes off. There are two things that is happening here. One is a lot of oxalate crystals are being thrown into the urine. So the patient going for an excessive oxaluria, and also there is a regular hypotension which knocks out the kidney. The kidney goes in for a chronic kidney insufficiency and also hypomagnesemia. The patient is lethargic, not able to move his muscles. That is hypomagnesemia. Intestinal adaptation, I told you, the moment you resect, the rest of the bowel starts adapting within 24 hours of the significant intestinal resection, and it continues for more than 2 years. This you should know. In acute phase, post-resection to 4 weeks, intestinal losses and metabolic derangement occurs. Then after that, 1 to 2 years, the adaptive phase comes. Then it maintains long term. So during this time, in the post-resection, 4 weeks, nearly a month, optimize fluid management and individual dietary regime by in consultation with a good nutritionist who knows about all this. Intestinal adaptation, up to 4 weeks, there is hyperemia of the bowel wall. Promote mucosal hyperplasia, increase number and size of the crypts and villi in the ileum, slowing down the small bowel transit time, highly depend on luminal presence of nutrients. This is where the nutritionists come into play. You may not be aware until otherwise you are regularly handling such small bowel syndromes. The people must be there who are well qualified nutritionists and has got a clinical acumen about how to give the food, where it will get absorbed, where it can prevent diarrhea. All the things should be taken in consultation with the nutritionist. Who knows, one of you may become a small bowel transplant surgeon, but you must know, you may work in such a unit that you may get a lot of small bowel syndromes. Again, I'm repeating, you must know this. Hyperemia up to 4 weeks. It promotes mucosal hyperplasia so that the absorption becomes more. Increase the number of crypts and villi in the ileum, and slow small bowel transit time. Highly depend on luminal nutrition. You should not give high carbohydrate diet, become hyperosmolar, draws the fluid from the vascular system, and extensive diarrhea, which prevents the nutritional support. So carbohydrate diet must be minimized. High protein diet should be given. Fat should be calculated along with supplementation of pancreatic enzymes. Management. Medical management, main goal, optimization and maintenance of nutritional absorption, fluid and electrolyte balance, vitamin and trace elements retention, nutritional and weight maintenance. These are the goals while you are treating a patient with small bowel syndrome. This must be taken into mind in consultation with a good nutritionist. You must do all this. Or train one of your PG in the nutrition aspect of it. It will be useful for him. Or you yourself get acquainted if you are going to do only small bowel surgery. Medical management acute phase, IV replacement of losses. The best thing would be a 5% dextrose containing Ringer lactate solution. Stomal and fecal losses must be replaced every 1 to 2 hours. See how difficult it is. Replacement of water-soluble vitamins and trace elements. Proton pump inhibitor so that the acid secretion is less, the diarrhea is less. Control and treatment of sepsis. When you are not giving an enteral nutrition, the sepsis is a very dangerous weapon sitting on your head. The principle of management should be as quick as possible. You must shift from parenteral nutrition to enteral nutrition if the patient condition allows. Drugs in acute phase, H2 blocker therapy, Octreotide H2 reduces the gastric acid secretion. Octreotide 50 to 100 microgram BD or TID dose reduce the intraluminal fluid load. Loperamide, which slows down the intestinal motility to the tune of 4 to 16 milligram per day, reduces the diarrhea. By giving cholestyramine, it combines with the bile salts, makes it inactive so that the choleretic portion of the diarrhea, choleretic diarrhea is taken off, the bile salts entry into the colon is reduced. Metronidazole to reduce the small bowel bacterial overgrowth, which is not good. That should be given to the tune of 800 to 1200 milligram a day. Pancreatic enzyme is a must to be given anywhere between 25,000 to 40,000 units, especially to reduce the steatorrhea. These are the drugs in acute phase to be used. Enteral feeding in acute phase, enteral nutrition should begin by postoperative day 4 to 5 if it is possible. It facilitates the intestinal adaptation quickly. Overnight feeding allows maximal use of gut. That means when the patient is lying rest. A nocturnal feeding helps the maximum use of the gut so that the absorption will be more. First, you must start with isotonic salt glucose solution. Then oxalate in the diet should be totally avoided. It should have a fiber-containing formula preferred in patients with an intact colon because it is good. Management in adaptation phase, diet management, fluid management, precautions for orally administered medication, it may not get absorbed. So enteric-coated tablets, enteric-coated capsules and all should be avoided to the great extent. Pharmacological therapy to reduce the fluid loss. If intestinal function is improving, weaning off the parenteral nutrition must be your aim in the back of the mind. Monitoring the micronutrient deficiency and supplementation. Very, very, very important. Diet and fluid administered. Diet. If colon is present, carbohydrate must be to the tune of 50 to 60% of the food, of 60% of the calories. If it is colon is absent, it must be anywhere between 40 and 50. Fat, if the colon is present, 20 to 30% of the calories in the form of medium chain and long chain triglycerides. Whereas 30 to 40 calorie in case colon is absent, only with long chain triglyceride. Protein, 20 to 30% of the calories. Colon, only absent, 20 to 30% of the same. Fiber, soluble fluid. ORS with hypotonic saline. In case colon is present, water gets absorbed. But if the colon is absent, you give only ORS, which is isoosmolar. Precaution for oral drugs. Small bowel syndrome patient have impaired absorption, entry-coated or delayed release medication should be avoided for better therapeutic effect of the drug. Alternative methods, you can give it as a suppository if the rectum is present, or it can be given in the transdermal routes. Pharmacological therapy to reduce the fluid loss, acid suppression, PPI, VID dose for 6 months, antidiarrheals, reduces the transit time. With ineffective, if it is ineffective still then, you can add codeine sulfate to the tune of 15 to 16 milligram, either BD or TID dose. Pharmacological therapy to reduce the fluid loss. Other modalities include octreotide, low-dose oral antibiotics that reduces the bacterial overload and bacterial overgrowth in the small bowel. Clonidine, it's still under research. Exenatidine and liraglutide, GLP-1 analog, reduces ostomy output, increases energy absorption. This again, go through this slide, is very important. Weaning from parent nutrition, that must be your aim. He is able to tolerate feeds by assessing the symptoms. No bloating, not much of diarrhea, he is quite comfortable, no distended abdomen. Good hydration status. Electrolytes and weight gain are the positive side. An optimal interval for making weaning decisions are not defined. It is in one's own clinical acumen in seeing the patient clinically. Gradual parental nutrition reduction to be done. It should not be done quickly. It has to be weaned off slowly. Gradual weaning. There is a low risk of dehydration. You should not suddenly wean. Monitoring hydration status. Maintaining urinary sodium concentration more than 20 milli equivalent per liter. Spot sodium. Daily urinary volume must be more than 1 liter. Enteral balance, that is oral fluid minus stool output, 50 to 100 ml per day should be given, should be maintained. This is a GLP-2 analog. This is reserved for persistent intestinal failure where you are not able to wean off. Severe impairment in quality of life due to TPN, that is loss of vascular access sites, catheter-related infections and liver disease. Initiates and maintains small bowel adaptive responses and improve absorption. These are other drugs. Complication of SBS and management, small bowel syndrome and management, metabolic complication, diarrhea, hypocalcemia, hypomagnesemia, and deficiency in minerals. It must be managed with adequate replacement and prevent the hurrying of the intestinal motility by seeing whether your nutrition things is all right. It is less of carbohydrates. You are giving anti-motility drugs and slowing down the transit time. All these things must be taken into consideration to prevent this metabolic complication. If not possible, replace. That is the only thing. Small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. It causes sluggish peristalsis. Because of the regurg, it causes loss of ileocecal valve, which is very, very important in a case of small bowel syndrome. So there is a retrograde flow of bacteria from the colon and low pH. Symptoms: gas bloating, diarrhea, constipation and steatorrhea, weight loss, nutrition deficiency, foul smelling, halitosis, very, very important. People cannot go near it. Feculent smelling breath, halitosis. Pungent stool odor. If he goes to the bathroom, nobody can go for another half an hour. So all these are the drawbacks of small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So any patient who comes with halitosis, rule out the possibility of malabsorption in that patient. Diagnosis, culture of the small bowel aspirate, hydrogen breath test, treatment probiotics and antibiotics. That's all. Renal stones, actually, the calcium and oxalate gets excreted through the motion if the normal passage is there and normal fat and this thing calcium gets absorbed. If there is a malabsorption of fat and calcium, they could not join, the oxalates could not join with fat and calcium, so that they go in a different route. That is, they go into the bloodstream as oxalate and becomes oxalate crystals in the filtering bed, that is the kidney. So oxaluria is one of the complications of a small bowel, short bowel syndrome. Cholelithiasis, very, very important. If less than 1 centimeter of the intestine remains with resected terminal ileum, bile salt loss exceeds, synthetic capacity of the liver is more than the loss. So loss of bile salt precipitate gallstones. Second mechanism, long-term parenteral nutrition, gallbladder stasis, cholestasis. So these are the two causes of gallstone disease in a case of small bowel syndrome. So you have seen a gallstone disease, you have seen oxalate stones in the kidney due to oxaluria, which is the one other cause for precipitating a chronic renal insufficiency along with hypovolemia and hypoperfusion of the kidney. So you must remember all this. Complications of long-term parenteral nutrition in small bowel syndrome includes catheter-related complication, infection and thrombosis, metabolic disorders, liver disorder, they are going for steatohepatitis and so on, 15 to 40%, fatty liver, steatohepatitis, fibrosis, cirrhosis, leads to end-stage liver failure. So far, we have seen the management of small bowel syndrome in a conservative way or a medical line of management, trying to wean off the total parenteral nutrition. All these we have discussed thoroughly. You know the complication, everything. Keeping a patient prolonged on total parenteral nutrition therapy is dangerous until otherwise we cannot do, or there is no facility for a transplant, because catheter sepsis, at one time you will not get any peripheral vein to approach for a total parenteral nutrition. If you introduce an infection into the central line, and you will have to select the central line nutrients, it's very difficult to maintain. That is where you go in for a surgical option of increased lengthening of the bowel or a small bowel transplant. So at initial surgery, preserve as much bowel length as possible, including the ileocecal valve, if it is possible. Accurate documentation of the length, you must measure the length and write it in the case sheet, how much of ileum you have left, how much of jejunum you have left. You must see whether the ileocecal valve is good. You must see the rest of the colon is all right. Jejunum must be calculated from the duodenojejunal junction to the available jejunum. All these must be clearly documented. Even in an emergency, it hardly takes 2-3 minutes. One postgraduate or one junior colleague of yours can write it, or you yourself can write it. Adjunctive procedures for small bowel syndrome should not be performed at the time of initial surgery. I'm trying to lengthen it, don't do it. Leave him alone, let him recover from the acute illness. Then you think about it, how is he is going. He is able to be managed conservatively. Just by establishing the continuity of the bowel, is he able to manage, or he does really require a lengthening procedure or a transplant? That has to be decided after some time when the patient general condition stabilizes, the acute problem is over. At reoperation, the goal is you must have an internal autonomy. Indications are you are not able to achieve parenteral nutrition independence. You are not able to wean him out. Develop hepatic complications, chronic parenteral nutrition therapy due to that. Recurrent central line sepsis, bacterial growth and stasis, and non-availability of the parental root. There's one more sentence to be added: non-availability of the parental root. So the goal is we will have to create an enteral autonomy. Autonomy may be in the form of a lengthening procedure, maybe in the form of a transplant. Surgical procedures for small bowel syndrome. Stoma taking down and re-establishing the intestinal continuity. There are bowel inside. The ileum is inside. The ileocecal valve is inside. I've tided over the acute phase. The colon is intact. Why not I give an intestinal continuity so that the patient will feel much better? The loss will be less. Yes, of course you can do it. It should be done if clinically it is feasible. Diarrhea is a troublesome complication. You will have to manage that with your nutrition, what you're going to give enterally. Also, you'll have to manage it with anti-motility drugs. Probably the patient may do well with little bit of frequency of motion. That also over a period of time. This adaptation of the intestine and the frequency will come down. Even the thickness of the motion also will increase and he'll feel comfortable. For that, at least 3 feet of the small intestine is required to prevent diarrhea and perineal complications. To prolong the transit or improve the motility, you can fix an antiperistaltic segment in between two regular segments so that the antiperistaltic segment acts as a temporary obstructing area, allowing only as a conduit, and so that there's certain amount of retrograde and absorption will be more. So interposition of an antiperistaltic segment, but it has not done well. People have gone in for obstruction. They will have to revise the whole thing. So it is not done anymore. It has fallen out. It has become obsolete. Creating a distal antiperistaltic segment. Length of the reverse must be for 5 to 15. Slow the intestinal, increase the absorption 30. This is all theoretical only, but it produces a very severe acute problem. It is only historical interest, but one should know about it. Here, this is good. Why colon is good means, colon has got an enormous capacity to absorb water. That is why many of the drugs also given into the colon, say neomycin enema and so on and so forth. In children, some of the children, they can give the drug through the rectum and colon. So isoperistaltic or an antiperistaltic orientation to slow down the transit time, benefit of reabsorption of water, electrolytes and nutrients. Complications are colonic dilatation and enterocolitis. This enterocolitis is a big nuisance. The patient may feel very, very bad. But compared to a small bowel interposition, a colonic interposition is much better. Intestinal tapering, it is nothing but narrowing down the lumen by taking a sliver of tissue in the anti-mesenteric border of the dilated segment so that the narrowing causes slow transit and the absorption time will be more, so they will recover. This is one of the procedures that we think. A triangular sleeve is taken out of the anti-mesenteric border and slow it down. So you can see how the continuity is established. You can beautifully see how the continuity is established after narrowing it down. This restoration of continuity. This is called tapering procedure. Otherwise, if the bowel is more than 3 centimeters in diameter, you can plicate the anti-mesenteric border so that absorptive surface is not lost, but the transit time is increased. It slows down. So this is one of the plication procedure. Go to the anti-mesenteric border, push the anti-mesenteric border inside, catch hold and start suturing. This is called intestinal plication, interrupted sutures. You can see the absorptive surface is not lost, but you have created a partial obstruction so that the transit time is delayed, the absorption becomes more. Intestinal lengthening procedures have come in a big way. There are two things. One, you can put a good incision, lengthier incision in the axis of the bowel for a sufficient amount of this thing, with the preserved blood supply from the mesentery to both the edges, and roll it and make as tubes and pull it in anastomosis. That's called LILT, longitudinal intestinal lengthening. You can use series cuts on the mesenteric border, anti-mesenteric border, so that it will become like a step, a narrowed lumen. You can lengthen the intestine over a period of time, it gets adapted. Or there is one thing called isolated bowel segment. What he does is, a bowel segment is taken, it's about 3 centimeter diameter, bowel segment is taken. He completely peels off the serosa and muscularis and then attaches to the raw surface of the abdominal wall or the liver. Over a period of time, he leaves it. It develops nice collaterals. Then he disconnects, make them into 2 tubes and lengthen the thing. This is called Kimura and Ioba procedure. One by one, I'll show you. Longitudinal intestinal lengthening and tailoring, LILT, done in 1980 by Bianchi, who is a pioneer in lengthening procedures. It delayed the transit time without compromising the mucosal surface. Anatomic criteria, intestinal diameter must be more than 3 centimeter. Length to the residual small bowel must be greater than 40 centimeter. Dilated bowel must be greater than 20 centimeter. These are the criteria. What he does is, first he opens up the layers of the mesentery and makes individual blood supply these 2. He fires a stapler, this becomes 2 tubes. Then again he pulls it down and anastomosis to this. It's a beautiful diagram. Open up the mesentery so that you give individual arterial venous supply to both the things. In between the mesentery, you put into this thing and fire. You get 2 tubes with their intact vascularity. Again, that's how that has been closed. See, it is divided. Then again, it is closed posteriorly, the one which is attached to the mesentery. Then pull it out. This is called anteriorly. And both are anastomosed so that you have doubled that length. Over a period of time, intestinal adaptation comes and patient gets a good length. This is one of the good procedures if you do it carefully. And I'm waiting for a case to come to do it. Probably I'll do it before I leave. Let us see. This is serious. What you do is, like this, stepwise, anti-mesenteric, mesenteric, anti-mesenteric, mesenteric, without compromise. You made various cuts doing the staplers, but the lumen is present here, the lumen is present here, the lumen is present here. When you stretch it, it will be like a ladder. It is in 2003, Kim et al. Published. This is called step procedure, nothing but serial transverse enteroplasty. An average of 10 to 20 staple lines are used, reducing the diameter to 2 centimeter, but it increases the length to about 1.5 to 2 fold. And the final picture will be like this. The foot will go like this, go like this, go like this, go like this. The only thing is you must take the, when you're going near the mesenteric border, you must be very careful about the thing. This is again a good procedure. It has come out well and people have produced good results. There are a lot of papers. Isolated segment, this is what I say. He peels off everything. He makes the raw area, the lateral abdominal wall, or he takes off the Gleason's capsule in the liver, attaches this. This gains vascularity. Dilated bowel segment, deseromyotomy along the anti-mesenteric border, sutures to the deep internalized anterior abdominal wall, model 1, decapsulated liver, model 2, or even he can even do it in the adjacent bowel. The thing is, over a period of time, it acquires its own blood supply. So that it can be divided into 2 segments and then anastomosed. I'll tell you. See how beautifully development of collaterals after that. Then longitudinal split of the parallels. This is, he makes a longitudinal split like this and comes an anastomosis here. One is anastomosis, the other one will be anastomosis, or it can be brought out as an ostomy. Later on, you can do an anastomosis. One bowel like this is made to 2. By acquiring a vascular capacity, vascularity from the raw area. That is called Ioba and Kimura's procedure. So the lengthening procedures are LILT, step, and this. I want Kimura how beautifully he has done it. What is attached to the liver is still there because he cannot remove that. It has developed collaterals. What is not attached to the liver, he made as two pipes. Again, he has anastomosis. So what a big length he has got. An end-to-end anastomosis created. This is another procedure. I wish one of you become a transplant surgeon or a person who deals with small bowel syndrome. It's one of the excellent field. Dedicated work if you do, you will get a lot of job satisfaction and you will get blessings from many other people. Transplant, worsening liver failure, loss of central venous access, recurrent and severe sepsis, failure to achieve more than half the estimated caloric requirement centrally if accompanied by growth failure. Again, I am telling you, from type 2 onwards, you must have a constant thinking of doing either a lengthening procedure. If not feasible, you must go on to a transplant. The indications being worsening liver failure, not able to lengthen the bowel, loss of central venous access route, recurrent and severe sepsis, failure to achieve more than half the estimated calorie requirements enterally if accompanied by a growth retardation. Types of transplant. One is called a composite liver transplant, where the whole of the liver, duodenum, pancreas, and small bowel is taken as a one thing. And anastomose. Colonic segments have been included to increase the post-transplant absorption. See here, there is no colon. You can add colon to this so that the absorption capacity is more. Full multivisceral graft, that's called it. Include the stomach to the colonic end or isolated intestinal transplant. You can take a piece of transplant, about 2 feet or 3 feet, and you can do it. The most difficult being the isolated liver intestinal transplant. The best being this, provided you get so much of organs, because you will have to sacrifice all the organs to one individual. Type A, you can see the liver, stomach, small bowel. Everything is transplanted. Isolated, this is isolated intestinal transplant, where this is the viable, this is not viable. The whole of the intestine is anastomosed. This is called type A. Type B is combined. Liver is transplanted. Stomach and duodenum was already there. Small bowel, everything is there. Colon is there. Combined liver and intestinal graft. The donor duodenum and pancreas is in continuity. The other one is multivisceral transplant. All the organs are being transplanted. I'll tell you again. Combined liver and intestinal graft. Liver and intestinal graft. The donor duodenum and the pancreas are in continuity. No, it should be recipient duodenum. Yeah. Yes. It should be recipient, not donor. The recipient duodenum and pancreas are in continuity, but they have transplanted the liver and the small bowel. Am I correct? There is a wrong thing. It should be read as recipient. Yeah, multivisceral transplant where the donor organs, liver, stomach, complete bowel, except the large bowel, the whole thing is transplanted. Includes liver, stomach, duodenum, pancreas, and small bowel. So these are the three types. Again, I repeat: isolated small bowel transplant, along with liver and small bowel, along with liver, stomach, and small bowel. Okay, that's what it is. Summary of transplantation. Transplantation has established itself as a therapeutic modality for intestinal failure, whatever it is, due to surgery or anything else also. Long-term outcomes have improved. 3-year survival rate is to the tune of 65%. Future of intestinal transplant is promising due to standardized surgical technique, improved immunosuppression regimes to promote tolerance. Future challenges: recognition and prevention of both short-term and long-term complications. Short-term could be an acute rejection. Long-term complication can be a chronic renal failure or post-transplant lymphoproliferative disorders, etc. Thank you.